Hello and welcome to Improving Technology Training, a webinar sponsored by the Washington State Library and presented by Stephanie Girding. I'm Jennifer Fenton, the training coordinator at the Washington State Library, and with me this morning is Joe, our technician. So Joe's available if your sound is cutting in and out or you're having difficulties. So please give a shout out. Both of us have another meeting at 9:30, so we'll be leaving and Stephanie will be on her own the second half, just an FYI. So hopefully any technical issues will be resolved prior to that. We're really glad you could all join us today, and this is the final of a series of webinars on technology training that Stephanie has been presenting. The archives of the whole series are going to go up on our website and be available. So if you missed any of them or want to let other people know about them, they will be available, and I will email out the archive list to the attendees after they are posted and live. So it's my great pleasure to turn this over to Stephanie to share improving technology training with you. Take it away, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you, Jennifer, and thanks to everyone at the Washington State Library for supporting us in joining together for this webinar today. And let's see. We'll go ahead and start with our learning objectives. So today we're really focused on improving technology training. So thinking about that, really thinking about, well, how do you evaluate the library technology training that's going on at your library? And then what can we do to really empower our staff and our volunteers, the people that are doing the training, to really help strengthen what we're doing? And then I wanted to leave some time at the end, since this is our last session, to really talk about, are there any difficult library training situations that would really help you improve your training if you could solve them? So leaving some time for us to talk together at the end. So feel free in our time together today to join in on the chat, to ask questions or post any advice that you have, any feedback that you have. We want to make sure that this is a really interactive learning community today. And I would love to know in the chat if you could post if this is your first in this series of webinars, or if any of you have attended all of them. So share that in the chat. Is this your first one, or have you done all of them? All right, quite a few people have done all of them. Good. See if there's anybody that's new. Okay, great. Good. Well, so a lot of you will be familiar then with this training cycle that we've been talking about during our series. And we started off with that first webinar really talking about training plans and needs assessments, and then talked a lot about workshop planning in the next one and learning objectives, and then really how to make it interactive with learning activities and making that learning experience really the best that we could. So now we're ready for that last phase in the training cycle, working on evaluation. And as we've talked about this middle picture, sometimes technology training is sort of like taking a ride down the river. You never really know what you're going to experience, and sometimes you have to just go with it to figure out what's going on and really respond to what the river's got for you today, just like you have to respond to the people around you. So it's true that technology is really just constantly changing these days. So making sure that we're staying relevant is definitely an ongoing process these days. And so, of course, I think it's really important that we take time to really plan. And I like this quote, "We have very little time, therefore we must proceed very slowly," which I think has Buddhist origins, but really thinking about the fact that a lot of times in our libraries these days we feel like we're stretched really thin, and we definitely are all wearing a lot of hats, but really realizing that if we take the time to plan and take the time to evaluate what we're doing. We can actually save ourselves a lot of time in the long run, and we can make sure that we're really using our resources in the best way that we can. So even though it might seem like, oh, I don't have time to evaluate, I got to just keep going forward, you'll really end up saving yourself time and making sure that what you are doing, you're doing to the very best of your abilities and of your library's capabilities as well. So as we've talked about, learning is sort of an art, and everybody learns differently, and it can definitely be a messy experience as well. So I think this is where it kind of becomes difficult sometimes to evaluate and figure out, you know, are we helping people learn? Are we being effective with our technology training? So really what we're thinking about is just what can you do to get your training program from where it is now to where your community needs it to be. And of course by training program I mean just anything that you're doing at your library right now to teach people about technology, whether you're training your staff or if you're training the public, or even if your training means that people are asking you questions at the reference desk or as they're using the computers. I still really count that as doing training around technology as well. Even those little one-on-one sessions definitely count. So I think, of course, planning is the way that we can really get there. We can really help meet those community needs. And I think it's fine to use baby steps to get there. And I think this is really a good key for a lot of libraries. I've worked with some big libraries and really small rural libraries, and I think just really thinking about what can I do this week to get started in the right direction is the right thing to do. And sometimes just even taking 15 minutes a week. So we'll talk about sort of some big picture ideas, but making sure that you don't get overwhelmed with some of this. And some of it really you can take baby steps to get there. All right. So why do you evaluate training? So let's share a little bit and talk a little bit in the chat. So why do you evaluate training at your library? And you can also share how you evaluate training in your libraries. So why do you think it's important that we evaluate? And how are you currently doing it? Share that in the chat. Okay, Beth said to become a better trainer. Susie said we can spot the weaknesses. Christina, effectiveness. Victoria, to stay current. Dawn said see if we're accomplishing what we intended to. Dolores says use surveys to learn what to teach and if patrons enjoy and understand it. Great. Michelle said to know if the materials in my presentation is clear and helpful. To ensure taxpayer money is spent to the best use. Good. To ensure relevancy of content. To make sure the individuals are understanding what you're teaching. To make sure that you're being effective at all. To ensure that our patrons are learning and being empowered to use and experiment with technology rather than just asking us each time how to do something. I like that, Marta. Thank you. Or just wasting your own time and theirs, right? Okay, Dawn said surveys and reflection. Victoria said we wrote down all possible technologies and then assigned levels with different job classifications. Okay, great. Thinking about staff training, we'll definitely talk more about that in just a little bit. Good. Thank you all for sharing. Well, I came up with 5 different reasons, and I think you got to all of these. So improving the training, whether you're talking about the however it is that you're wanting to improve that, whether it's the trainer itself or the content, promoting personal growth and self-evaluation. So some of you mentioned both for yourself as a trainer and also for the learners, trying to figure out what they learned. Assessing the degree of demonstrated achievement, so measuring those results. And that can be an important thing as well to be able to show to our stakeholders and funders. And then determining future learning needs, and some of you mentioned that as well, trying to figure out what else the patrons want you to train on. And then trying to demonstrate that impact, proving whether it's a service is of value. which can be something really good to do as well. Good. So let me know if you have any questions, again, at any time in the chat. When I think about evaluation, I come up with lots of questions to ask. So that's what these next slides are going to be. And you will get a copy of these slides, so you don't have to worry about writing these all down and taking notes unless that's a good way for you to learn. But I think that that's sort of what evaluation is all about. It answers a lot of questions that we're having. So you might be trying to find out what's working well. And there's a business process that calls this appreciative inquiry. So really just looking at, well, what are we doing that's really working well and how can we do more of that? Which I think is a really important thing to think about. I remember doing some training and I had some libraries that were really complaining about there being so many people that were at the library using computers and that it was noisy and distracting and a big drain on their staff time. And I just thought, well, you know, really we're offering a service that people want and need, and it's really a great thing that they're in our libraries and that they're asking for this help. But how can we then do more of that? Or do we need to change our situation a little bit to meet those needs better? Maybe we need to rearrange the computers or get more computers, or maybe have some computers set aside that are for group work, those sort of things. But really trying to focus more on what's working instead of that second question, what isn't working? And how can we change that? But that's something good to think about too, I think, not to get too mired down in that. But, are there things that aren't working well? Are there classes that you're teaching that no one's coming to or that few people are coming to? Or are you having problems with your registration? Any of those sort of things, really trying to think about that big picture. And then, of course, what impact is our tech training having? And this is something that we'll talk about, how do you capture that? But definitely a good thing to be able to know and to be able to share. Great when it comes to budgeting time and making those presentations. Being able to share, are we helping people find jobs in our community? Are we helping people find health information? Are we really helping solve some of those big problems going on in our communities? And then what else can we be doing? Are there other opportunities? Can we partner with other organizations? And then what are those needs? Really trying to figure that out. So as part of evaluation, you might need to be thinking about what needs to be evaluated. So do you need to evaluate the trainers that are doing the workshops? And I know for myself as a trainer, almost every workshop does have an evaluation, which I think can be a really good thing. But I think being really careful about is this information that you're collecting valuable and are you using it? Don't do it just to do it. But if it's valuable information, then keep doing it. But, sometimes with evaluating trainers, we'll talk more about this, but sometimes it's what I call a smile sheet. It's just did I like the person or not? And that might not be valuable after, someone has done training for a year, they're a good trainer. Do you need to keep finding that out? Maybe there's other information that you need to evaluate instead. Sometimes it's the workshop or the content, however you're delivering your training, finding out if that's effective. Also the training plan, which we talked about in an earlier webinar, really trying to plan across the library what you're doing for your staff and your patrons. And that's something that can be evaluated as well. And then as part of that plan, hopefully you have goals and outcomes that you're working on. And so trying to really tie those back and find out, are you accomplishing them? And are you making a difference? What's that impact? Also, you might need to think about the cost. How much does it cost? Does it cost in staff time? Does it cost in other resources? Is that effective? And, sometimes this is where we can really prove our worth, because often we're the only place where people can get free training in their communities that would be charged a lot if somebody was just attending it through a private organization. Also partnerships, maybe you start off with a partnership and try it out and then evaluate it and see, is it working? Is there something that you can do to make it better? So thinking about having a whole evaluation plan, this might be something that you have as part of your training plan where you're really going to think about, why are you doing this? Who's going to be the audience for it? Are you evaluating just for the library, or are there funders that you need to report to, or are you reporting to your city or town? Always thinking about who is going to be really the audience can be really a good thing to think about as well. And then, of course, thinking about what do you need to know to be able to measure your progress, and when do you need to collect, when do you need the information. So sometimes there are things that you need to do even before you start a training program, sort of establishing those baselines. And thinking about how are you going to collect the data, and are you going to collect stories, and how can you do that as well. So how many of you, share in the chat if you do have some kind of extensive evaluation for your training program. Do you have evaluation sheets that you use at your end of your training, at the end of your workshops? Do you have something larger that you do? Share what you're doing. Do you do focus groups, any of those sort of things? See if we can learn from each other a little bit as well. So I also want to just mention briefly outcome-based evaluation, because I think that that is something that you might come across as a trainer. I know for me, this was something that took me a long time to sort of get my mind around, and a lot of government funding requires outcome-based evaluation, and also if people are getting grants, that might be a requirement as well, so you might find out that you need to do some of this. And I've been through 2-day-long training just on outcome-based evaluation to try to figure it out, and I finally figured it out. But really, it's just thinking about how do you measure the impact on the person and how they really changed as a result of the training. So the example that I always like to share is if we were going to just evaluate based on sort of the numbers for today. We could say how many people signed up. We could say how many people attended today. We could say how many people viewed the archived version, all of those things. We could even look at, how many people shared in the chat. But those are really measuring just the numbers, right? If we were going to measure the impact on you, we'd be more measuring what did you learn? Did you learn anything, and did it change you? So maybe we measure if there were any behavioral changes. So maybe as a result of taking this webinar, you go and start doing evaluation where you didn't do it before. Maybe your attitude changes. So maybe before you thought, oh, evaluation is a waste of time, and by the end of our time together today, you instead think, oh, this is something that I can do and that I should be doing. Or maybe you gain skills or knowledge. Condition or state, even sometimes we make that change in our library if we're helping people find jobs, and those sort of things that really change a person. That can be a good thing to do. And one of the things that I've found in measuring this is sometimes you can just ask people on an evaluation form at the end. You can just ask them, was your behavior, your attitude, your skills, your knowledge, or your condition and state changed? How has it changed? And I've done this before, and it's really an interesting way to get evaluation back on people, because you can really find out that exactly what they learned. And I've seen, people will take the time to write a sentence or two about these sort of things, but it's very interesting information to collect. And I know when I was first doing outcome-based evaluation, I really felt like, wow, this takes a lot of time, and this is really a difficult thing. And it does ask a lot of the participants as well, because they have to help you with this. And you kind of have to know where you started as well sometimes. So you have to know what their levels, what their skills or knowledge levels were before the training and then after the training. But this last question is really important, and why I think outcome-based evaluation is worth it, is that it does answer whether you're spending your resources on things that are making a difference, really finding out also what that difference is, that people are learning and are being changed. And, we have that phrase that we say, libraries change lives, and that's really true. So trying to measure that and communicate that of how are we changing those lives, and really getting to that information, I think, is an important part of it as well. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit into Kirkpatrick's evaluation hierarchy, his 4 levels of evaluation model. And he's a professor at the University of Washington and is a past president of ASTD, the American Society for Training and Development. And he has an evaluation model that's really widely used, especially in corporate training. And it really helped me to sort of think through how I was evaluating training. So we'll go through each of these. It kind of starts at the bottom and then works its way up. So at the very bottom level is measuring just reaction. And so these are those smile sheets that I was talking about that sometimes we use, is just finding out, you know, did you like it? Did you like the training? Did you like the trainer? You know, did it meet their needs? Would they recommend it? Sort of that smile sheet, very first step. On the next level, we really measure learning. So getting at more of that outcome-based evaluation step. Did they learn skills or knowledge or have a change in their attitude or their confidence? And so with this, you might need to do a little pre-testing and post-testing to find that out. Or you can have people just, you know, themselves share whether they felt a change or not. But sometimes, you know, it's a little hard to measure that on our own. And then level 3 really gets at that behavior change. So do people not only learn, but then do they apply what they learn? So do they go to your technology training and then they're able to go home and do it on their own, right? And level 4 is really results. So that's that very highest level. So what result has the training achieved? So this might be really on the highest level of the impact on the wider community. So maybe somebody attends your training and they go home and they practice, and then, you know, maybe they set up a volunteer database for the community to use. And this all came about as a result of going to the library access training, you know, those sort of things. So trying to think about what level that you're really trying to evaluate on. And of course, all of this means that you're collecting a lot of data. So you've probably heard quantitative or qualitative, really thinking about how to collect that information. So the qualitative, again, is just all about those numbers. So how many people were trained, how much did it cost, maybe how many hours of training was given. But the qualitative is really interesting information to try to gather as well. So that's really trying to gather that story of how people have used the technology training in your library. That can be a really important thing to collect as well. And sometimes, you know, as trainers, we hear these stories, right? So sometimes people come back into the library and they say, you know, oh, I took one of your classes 2 months ago and now I'm able to do these things. And so that's something that can be collected if you think about that purposely. But then sometimes, you know, we don't see those people again and we're not really sure. So even doing something where you're trying purposely to collect those stories, maybe it's sending out an email to them 6 months later and asking them to share. You know, a lot of libraries are collecting just library stories. How does the library change your life, just in general? There was one library I saw that did a story tree. So they set up, I think it was a Christmas tree in their lobby, and they had little cards and envelopes, and they just invited people to write down their library story. How did the library change their life? And then people would write them down and pin them onto the tree. So they ended up with this whole story tree. So there's a lot of good ways that you can collect stories like this. Definitely share in the chat if you're collecting stories and how you're doing that as well. And I'm going to look over the chat here and see a lot of you are sharing some about your using your evaluation sheets. Okay, and putting them into a database, that's good. Written surveys, workshop evaluation at class, follow-up evaluation, thinking about doing follow-up evaluation. Yeah. And Marta said they use evaluation sheets asking what they wanted to learn and ranking from 1 to 5 their comfort with the material after the training. Okay, that's an easy thing for them to do, right? Being able to just mark that off very quickly. And also making sure you leave time in your workshop as well for people to fill out those evaluations. Sometimes we forget about that, you know, when we wrap up the class and then we say, oh, do your evaluation. But instead, stopping 5 minutes early and giving them time to do that, not making them have to stay after to do that part. Good, okay. And A, I don't know your first name, shared informal questions at the end and collecting stories. So how are you collecting those stories? I'd love to hear that. Each evaluation entry could be a raffle entry for a Starbucks card. Very good, yes. Always good to kind of give them a little something as an incentive because it is some work that you're asking them to do as well. So there's a lot of different ways that we can go about collecting this information from them, as you said, using those surveys, questionnaires, just, you know, counting numbers. Okay, they collect the stories verbally and then write them down. Yeah, you know, and sometimes just putting that out there for staff, encouraging them to do so can be the thing to do. You know, even at the reference desk, sometimes you get people coming in and sharing or at circulation. They might have those stories too. So putting a little card where people can jot those down at the end of the day if they've heard some good story to collect. Yeah, and then you can do things, you know, like surveys as well, doing something online that people can fill out either at the end of the training or that you can email them afterwards. And we'll talk about some free ones of those on the next slide. Also, interviewing a few people, you know, following up with them later, especially if you have a series of classes or you know that you have some repeat customers, talking to them a little bit. Sometimes even just observation, you can see what people are learning. Doing something like a focus group to try to find out how is your technology training going or what do people need as well. Okay, and Beth says they grab stray positive comments at the circulation desk and archive positive emails, and they don't collect the bad news. Well, you know, sometimes it's good to collect that bad news. It sort of depends, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit as well. But there are a lot of really great free resources as well these days that you can use, and you know, some of these are free-ish because they have a free version and then a paid version. But I know SurveyMonkey I've used at libraries. Sometimes they have a limit like of 100, only 100 respondents are allowed per survey for free, and sometimes that's just fine for our needs. But this can be a really easy thing to do where people can fill it out on their own, as I said, after class, or you can email it to them and they can do it on their own time and doesn't take them very long to do, or even do both of those. You know, follow up later with a later survey. And what I really like about doing this is that then it compiles all the information for you. And you can even make nice little charts out of it and compile all of those comments and those sort of things as well. So share in the chat if you're using any of these or others that you found really useful. Also, Google Forms can be really helpful as well. They're part of Google Docs. And I saw a library that was using a Google form, and it seemed really easy to use as well, and something that you could implement pretty easily. So let me know if you're using any of those. Yeah, SurveyMonkey is really easy to use. Yeah, that's one that I've used a lot. Okay, and Dawn's used Google Forms and SurveyMonkey. And free QuizMaker is kind of a fun thing as well. You can use it for quizzes or for survey software. And sometimes, you know, building in some fun little quizzes can be a good way to just find out if people learned as well. And that can be something that's good for staff training as well, to find out if people have used it, have been learning as well, and making it sort of a fun thing. So here's a sample evaluation form that I've used before. And so putting in the objectives the learning objectives again so that people can review those, and then just asking, you know, were these objectives achieved? And how was the program, how was the trainer, all of those sort of things. And then you can see, getting at that outcome-based, just asking, you know, to describe a way that your knowledge or attitudes or skills or behavior have been changed by something that you learned. So I'll be using the following knowledge learned, I've changed my way of thinking about, I have the following new skill to use, I will implement the following new behavior. So you can see that they can easily write something in there, you know, even just a sentence about something that they learned. And for me as a trainer, this has been such useful feedback to get, to find out, oh, okay, they really are getting it, you know, and maybe sometimes they're getting more than I thought they would. That attitude question often surprises me, that people's attitudes are changed. You know, maybe they feel more comfortable, or all of those kind of things. That can be a really interesting thing to find out. And then just asking for suggestions for the future as well. What are those top training needs? Yeah, and Thomas shared, if you're using Constant Contact for emailing, their survey tools work really well as well. So if you have some kind of newsletter software or something that you're using, often they have built-in surveys too. Easy way to compile it. So this is, I teach a class for PLA, a month-long course that's called the Accidental Public Library Technology Trainer. And this was from one of my participants who is at a very small library in Madison County, Texas. And so what she did I thought was really interesting. She has an evaluation form that has two different parts to it. So the first part she has them fill out before the class so they can share what knowledge that they already had. And then the second section, it's on the same sheet, they fill out afterwards. So I thought that that was kind of a clever way to sort of do the before and after, but you're using the same sheet or the same form, you know, to really get at that. Because sometimes it is true, somebody will sit through a course and think, well, or through a workshop and think, well, I don't know what I really learned. But if they think about it at the beginning and at the end, that can be an easier way for them to do it. Yeah, really nice. And then they also have a section for rating the presenter, and then for additional comments or suggestions for other classes that they like. Yeah, Susie said, by starting the form at the beginning, you get buy-in to complete the form. Yeah, exactly. So I think that that's kind of nice because, you know, once they've started it, then they'll want to finish it at the end, and they'll be already invested in it and used to that mindset as well. So you can do all kinds of different pre and post questions. You can also do these, again, as an online survey, trying to collect information even before they attend. If you're doing something more formal, you can have them, you know, share why they're interested in the workshop and get some sort of pre-assessment information from them beforehand, and then do something at the end to find out if you achieved what you were wanting to do. So if you attended the other webinars, we shared the workshop plan template, and this does have an evaluation part of it. But why I wanted to bring it up again was that you can do your evaluation for a workshop really easily by tying it back to those learning objectives. So I'll show you an example of that. So if you have, this was for a 3-hour-long beginning emerging technology workshops, and these were their learning objectives. So being able to list social software, reasons to use social software, defining terms, explaining examples, practicing using technology, and then increasing their confidence and comfort levels. So if you set that up at the beginning, then trying to evaluate that, just look at all of those learning objectives and say, how am I going to be able to find out if they can do this? So listing 3 reasons to use the social software, how can you evaluate that? So maybe it's that you have them do that. You have them just, as part of the discussion, list reasons to use it. Or you could, this is something that you could ask on an evaluation form at the end if you wanted to do it that way. I always think it's kind of good to do those sort of things in a fun way as well. Defining the terms, how can you do that? And in the previous webinar, I shared a bingo example of how I did that, letting them select the get the terms and select them and play a bingo game and share the definitions themselves. So you can definitely do those things in a fun way. But it's true that some of these things can be just measured by observation, by the trainer watching them and seeing, can they create a blog themselves? Can they do a wiki update? All of those sort of things. So that can be part of it, and also just using that evaluation form and saying, you know, did we meet these objectives? Can you do these things? Having them just check them off, you know, put a little check box next to each of these objectives and say, which of these now are you able to do? That can be a really easy way to find out as well. So I did want to talk a little bit, we talked about doing more formal training plans as part of what you're doing at your library. And so I think having an evaluation is part of this and really trying to kind of think big. So this first one, by January 2014, the number of teens who attend technology workshops in the last year will increase by 40%. So if that's something that you're wanting to work towards. And I think, again, it's really good to look and see, do you have a technology plan in place at your library or a strategic plan? And if so, is training mentioned in it? And if that training's mentioned in it, what can you do as part of your technology training to help meet those goals that are set there? So this might be, you know, if you're trying to get more teens to take technology workshops, this might be a way to do it. So then thinking about, well, how are you going to measure that? You know, you're going to need to know how many people attended at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, and make sure that that increased and start those baby steps towards doing that. The second one, 80% who take library tech training will demonstrate new skills and will rate on an evaluation form that they were very satisfied with the training. So again, you'll need a baseline probably for them to be able to say that they demonstrated new skills, and then you're going to need to have that evaluation form and keep track of that. Did they say they were very satisfied with the training? So this can be a good way to kind of get at those bigger goals that you might have in your strategic or your technology plans. So I wanted to talk a little bit about staff training specifically because I know some of you are interested in that. So I think one thing that really helps is to set the expectations for our library staff. And you can do this really easily by setting up some training competencies. And WebJunction has a great example. They're public access computing technology competencies. And you'll get the link to this in your follow-up email as well. Share in the chat if any of you have used this or have used a different set of competencies or created your own, but really trying to think through what you're doing. Colorado State Library also developed a whole set of technology trainer competencies. So for us technology trainers, sometimes it's just trying to figure out, you know, what is it that our staff needs to know and where are they at so that we can figure out how we're going to get them there. Okay, Victoria said they created their own. Good, okay. And sometimes, you know, you can look at these and kind of modify them. Some libraries are doing things like mapping them to each staff position if you're at a larger library. Okay, and Laura said they're in the partnership with the Microsoft IT Academy at the Washington State Library, and they have vouchers for staff to get certified. Wonderful. Thomas said they're creating their own currently based on existing examples. Okay, good, good. You can share if you have any tips as you're getting started doing that. That can be a big process as you get started, but then I think it really gets a lot easier. There's a library that's profiled on the TechSoup for Libraries website, and she actually was at a small library, and she was the director, and she just really wanted to get all of her staff really with just basic technology skills. And so she just called them each into her office and had them basically take a little test to try to figure out where they were at. And she told them, you know, it doesn't affect your job now, but you know what, we need to figure out where you're at so I know what kind of training that you need and how we're going to get you there. And now all of her staff have really basic tech skills because of this, because she's really made that a priority for her library. Yeah, Tom said it's a huge process, definitely. but definitely can help to use some of these examples that are already out there. And the WebJunction one has been out for a couple years, but I heard that they are revisiting that right now, so I think they're going to have a new version come out probably at the beginning of next year, so that'll be good to see as well. So thinking about, how are you trying to figure out what your staff knows or can do already, trying to do that. Just even sometimes really breaking it down to this level. Sometimes it's hard to say, do you know how to use a printer? Yes or no, but there's so many different aspects to using a printer. So trying to break it down into all the different steps and then having them just rank it themselves. Are they just a novice or apprentice or an expert at doing this? Can they turn it on? Can they preview a print job? Can they clear a paper jam? This can be a really easy way to figure out, okay, who can do this and who needs to learn how to do this. I think that this is, one of the difficulties is sometimes you don't know what you don't know when it comes to technology. There's so many different aspects and so many things that you need to learn and to know. So really by trying to break it down this way, I think that can be a really important thing to do. So I thought that this was kind of funny, but sometimes when we do evaluations, I think it's really important that we don't jump to conclusions when we see them. And sometimes I feel like when I was first doing technology training, I was kind of this anxiety girl when I saw some of my evaluations that, sometimes you get one bad evaluation and that really kind of, you think, okay, I'm a horrible trainer, or, this program, we're doing a horrible job with it, all of those sort of things. But definitely realize that very often you will have at least one or two people who don't like what you're doing. And I just think that that's sort of the way life is. And that, sometimes one trainer will resonate with one person and another doesn't. Some of it is just, based on the people that you're training and can just really vary. So really trying to realize that you need to look at the evidence. If you've got one really bad score and one really great score, sometimes I think, throw out those really extreme different evaluations and kind of look at that median, look at that middle score. What are the majority of people saying? And really looking at that, trying to figure out, why are people not liking something? Is it because of the topic or the trainer, or maybe it's right after lunch and people are just tired? Just trying to think about all of those different aspects as well. Why are people not attending? Are they not attending because it's not a topic that you need to be teaching on? Or maybe it just wasn't publicized, or it wasn't held at the right time of day. Really trying to think through all of those different aspects before you make some big changes. Also, I think it's interesting, sometimes we try to measure what people learned and hold that up as, okay, they learned a lot, so this is a good class. But what if you have people that come and they already knew what you were going to teach? So then you haven't made that big difference, that big impact, but you maybe still taught a really good class, right? So really looking at how you're evaluating things, try to find out, if maybe it's just the evaluation that's not working right. But definitely not jumping to conclusions when you think about making those big changes. But, if you do get the same comment several times, it may mean that you do need to really listen to that and make those changes. So definitely think about that aspect as well. I know when I was a beginning technology trainer, I often got people on the evaluation form saying that I was difficult to hear, they couldn't hear me, and I would just think, oh, the computers are really loud, they just can't hear me because of that. But now I realized after a little while, after getting many of those comments, I thought maybe there really is something to it. So I actually took a workshop from a radio DJ on how to project your voice and how to, speak from deep below and those sort of things. So now I don't get those comments anymore, and I can talk to a big room full of people. So sometimes if you're getting a lot of those comments, it does mean you need to pay attention to it and you need to make some changes. So I know we've gone through a lot about evaluation. Just to sort of sum up, thinking that a long-term strategy is a great thing to do, a really easy shortcut, tying it to those training objectives. So we talked about in our previous webinar, really good to set those, but then easy to just put those down and have people check off whether they were achieved or not. Thinking about what data you need to collect, qualitative and quantitative, how you're going to collect those stories, those anecdotes, Kirkpatricks evaluation hierarchy, and then thinking about, you know, as far as a long-term strategy is concerned, do you want to do something like a pre and a post and then even months later do something? And sometimes when we get grant funding, they require this sort of thing. Definitely easier to do with staff training than with doing public training. Sometimes it's hard to track people down afterwards. But then even going to the end user and finding out, is it making a difference with our library users as well? Laura shared their youth services librarians do peer-to-peer coaching, so they observe each other's story times and steal cool ideas and learn things. Good for our adult librarians and competency courses. Good, good. Those are probably computer classes. Good, thank you. Yeah, definitely, you know, observing each other can be a great way to do it. I think also observing ourselves can be really helpful as well. And that's something that I really encourage new technology trainers to do. Videotape yourself and see how you do. And I know that this can seem a little to freak out some people a little bit to watch a video of themselves, but you know, usually it's a lot better than we think it's going to be. And I know when I was a new technology trainer, I found out some really useful things. One thing was that often after training, my wrist was sore and I couldn't figure out why. But then after watching a video of myself, I realized that when I was talking, I was doing this kind of rotational movement with my one hand. That was just kind of some kind of nervous thing that was funny. And I realized it was probably distracting to people, but it was also strange because it was making my wrist hurt. So then I learned, you know, to stop doing that. And sometimes that's something that a trainer can find out, that just, you know, there's something distracting that you're doing. We all, you know, seem to fall into those and those sort of things, something that we all have to remind ourselves of and work on. But any of those sort of things that can be helpful, and just figuring out, do you make sense, and are people able to keep up with you? All of those sort of things. So let's talk a little bit about motivating people as another way to improve our technology training. So usually this carrot and the stick thing doesn't work so well. So really trying to empower our technology trainers, really trying to empower the people that we're training as well, trying to create that environment where people can motivate themselves and where they can learn. Stephen Abrams posted a blog post saying, you know, does your library or your leadership style do that? You know, does your library have a lot of rules, and does the word control get used a lot? Is there a need for too many permissions? Remembering that learning is that messy, creative process. So really letting people be able to get in there and learn the way that they're able to do it. So this is from Daniel Pink. He wrote a book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And really interesting. So he made these first 3 points. That people are motivated because they want control over their own work or lives, they want to get better at what they do, or they want to make a bigger contribution to something larger than themselves. So really thinking about that in terms of your staff and your public training can be really useful. And I add this fourth one of relationships, because sometimes it's that people need personal connections. And you've probably seen that at your library, that some people are signing up for those technology classes because they don't want to learn it on their own. They want those personal connections, whether it's meeting other people or having that trainer in front of them. That can really make a big difference as well. So there are some interesting studies that have been done about appreciation. And so I'm going to share a couple of these. So this first one was from a behavioral economist, and so he had this exercise where people were to match letters together, and every round there was a group of people, and every round they were offered less money than the previous round. So the first group wrote their names at the top of the sheets and then matched up the letters and handed it in to the experimenter. And the experimenter looked at it and said, uh-huh, and then put it in a pile. The second group, they didn't write their names down, and the experimenter just put the sheets in a pile without even looking at them. And then the third group, when they were collected, the experimenter shredded them immediately when they were done with them and didn't even look at it. So the results were the people whose work was shredded, they needed twice as much money to keep going and to keep doing it. At the end of each round, they'd say, do you want to keep going? And they'd have to offer them more money than the people whose work was acknowledged. So the people in the second group, the one whose work was saved but ignored, they needed almost as much money as the people whose work was shredded. So just by looking at it and saying, uh-huh, made all of the difference, which I think is really interesting. So ignoring that performance is as bad as just shredding their effort right in front of their eyes. So I think that that's something to think of when we think about doing training and appreciating our own staff, that it does make a really big difference to people that their efforts are acknowledged. I know I worked at a library one time where once a month my boss started doing something where she would hand out a certificate of appreciation, and each person would get one. And it, you know, she was trying to do something good, but it ended up working the wrong way for me. It was totally demoralizing because every month what she would write down that she was praising me about would be something that was really little that I'd done when I was doing really big initiatives and big things instead. And I was kind of like, does she not know what I'm out there doing? So, you know, sometimes you have to really think about that feedback that you give people can be really important, but really knowing what it is that they do, I think, is an important part of it as well. So this was another study that was written about in the New York Times. And so this was a psychologist, and he did a study at a fundraising call center. And what they did was they had a student who had benefited from the center's scholarship fundraising efforts that came in. So they were raising money for the scholarship, and so a student that had gotten the scholarship came in and talked to the callers for 10 minutes about what a difference it made in their lives. And then a month later, they measured, and those callers that had talked to the student were spending 142% more time on the phone, and their revenues, they were collecting 171% more. So they talked to the callers and asked them, you know, was it the scholarship student's visit that had impacted them? And they all denied it. They all said, no, that didn't have anything to do about it. So they were motivated, but it was almost like they didn't realize what it was that had motivated them. So really interesting, but good to think about that helping other people is a big motivation, and I think definitely true for us in libraries, because that's, you know, what we're all about. When I ask people why they like working in their library, it's always about the people and how we're helping and that difference that we're making. So making sure that you highlight that, I think, is a really important part of it as well. So sometimes they call this pro-social behavior. So really trying to think about just even how we're helping other people. So this was another study that Grant ran, and what he did was he put signs up at hospital hand washing stations, and there were two different signs. So one said, hand hygiene prevents you from catching diseases, and the other one said, hand hygiene prevents patients from catching diseases. And the doctors and the nurses used 45% more hand sanitizer in the stations that mentioned the patients. So helping other people really made a bigger difference to them. So again, this is a really good thing to keep in mind when we're talking to our trainers and thinking about our trainers, is that it's going to make a bigger difference. And I know for me as a trainer, that's been something that I've used even as a way to sort of break through some of my own anxiety, that I think about, okay, I'm here to help other people. And that helps me get over some of my own nervousness that I might have, that really trying to focus on the people that are there instead, I think, can be a really important part of it as well. So it is true when we think about staff training that often we get those people that don't want to change, and they say these things, we've always done it that way, or I've never done it before. And I think, really thinking about it, that a lot of it is that it's not resistance as much as it's fear of the loss of the known. So they're afraid that they're going to, not be as competent if they try something new, or that they're not going to have as much respect, all of those sort of things. So trying to really think about that and try to tap into that if you have some people that are really resistant to that information, making those changes, I think, is really important as well. So as I said, I do want us to talk a little bit about what your greatest challenges are. So let's take some time to think about that and share those in the chat in our last few minutes together, and I'll get back to those in just a second. So are there things in your technology training that is a big challenge or an obstacle for you? Share those in the chat. We can brainstorm together about how to solve some of those if there's things we haven't covered already. Definitely true that some things we learn best in the calm and some in the storm, and I think that's really true with technology training, is that sometimes it's that practice that helps us learn, and sometimes by things sort of falling apart or having really a difficult situation, it can be a really good learning experience for us as well, right? And definitely one thing that I've found a lot of is that sometimes it's dealing with those difficult behaviors that can be our big challenge. So share in the chat if any of these are your challenges and any tips that you have in solving some of these different challenges. So that person that comes in that seems to know it all, those talkers, I know sometimes can be the thing. Any of you have any of these problems? Definitely I've seen for myself that a lot of times those know-it-alls just, sometimes they don't even realize that they're acting that way. And so by acknowledging that they have a lot of experience, that kind of thing can definitely come into play. Okay, a couple people shared those varied skill levels or not knowing the current levels of skills. So I think we talked about that some in one of the previous webinars if you want to go back and watch that. But I think one thing that really is helpful with that is just trying at the beginning to assess their skill levels some way, and then also having different activities that they can choose from. So maybe, if you're teaching internet search skills, having two different sets of exercises. So maybe a basic one and an advanced one, and letting people just spend 15 minutes of the class working on their own so that they can work at whatever level they're comfortable at. It also really helps if you can have two trainers in the room. So having a volunteer, a team, a senior, someone that can be in the room as well. So if you get someone who's really stuck to help out with that, that can be really helpful as well. Let's see what else we've got. Yeah, Darcy shared, pair up the know-it-all with someone who needs more help. That definitely can work as well, trying to pair those people up as well. There's one guy who walks around the room, never sits down, and annoys me to no end. Yeah, sometimes that's the way that they're going to learn, right? They might be that kinesthetic learner who needs to have that movement. I think it's fine to say, if it's distracting, especially to the participants, tell them, he's welcome to stand in the back of the room. But yeah, that definitely can be one of those things. Myers said her classes are an hour long, attended by elderly patrons, and she worries that asking them to fill out an evaluation form would be extra work and they'd resent it. Okay. Yeah, a brief optional sheet for them to fill out anonymously and turn if they want or want not. So think about, they're getting this training for free, So that's not a lot to ask, you know, and even setting it up that way. I think one thing that helps is telling them at the beginning, you know, we're going to ask you to fill out this evaluation form. Sometimes I've even handed it to them at the beginning and then they kind of fill it out as they go along, but I don't really think that that's too much to ask for. Having a paper version if that's what works better for them, or having them turn it in later, any of those sort of things. Okay, good. Yeah, had almost all of these at some point, definitely. Okay, good. All right. So as we start wrapping up our time together, yeah, Donna gave a great point. She does 2-hour sessions and has guided instructions the first hour and then free learning the second. That's a wonderful idea, really good. Okay, so I did want to mention as we wrap up our time together today, the EDGE training initiative. If you haven't heard about it yet, definitely go visit their website, libraryedge.org. You might find that that is a really useful resource, and you'll definitely be hearing more about that in the upcoming months as well. So I wanted to share with you a quote from Confucius: "He who knows all the answers has not been asked all the questions." So really fine for you to have these ongoing questions. Feel free to email me and ask me any of the questions that you might have. My email address is stephaniegirding@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any things that you have ongoing, and I know Jennifer shared that they're going to be compiling all of these webinars together, and we'll send you out information about that. Marta also shared ditto the comment that handing out the evaluation at the beginning works well. She said she did that and got 75% of evaluations back compared to 25% who just had it at the end on a table. Okay, really good. Good tip. Thank you for sharing that. So I do want to thank you all for being so sharing in the chat today. That was really wonderful. We can always just learn from each other a lot. I'm glad so many of you were able to participate in a lot of these different sessions in this series, and I do want to thank the Washington State Library for providing this to you all and inviting me to participate as well. Okay, thank you all.